Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video we're going to look at how to change the engine oil in your car. Before we start, we're going to need some tools. First thing on the list is we're just going to need a drain tray and a funnel. Next on the list is a socket set. Then we're going to need a oil filter. Next on the list is some oil, and lastly a oil filter wrench. Now the oil weight and oil filter type will be specific to your car model. Now if you're not sure what oil and filter type you're needing to run in your car, you're best to go into a automotive shop and just give them your car make and model, or sometimes they can just look up your car on a number plate. They'll have a database and they'll be able to pick out the best oil and the suitable oil filter type for the type of car that you have. If you're able to follow this video, you'll be able to do a oil change on your own car, but just keep in mind that the oil and filter will be specific to your car model. Before we get under the car, we'll just identify each major component in the engine bay here. So we've got our engine on the left hand side, and if we look down there you can just see we've got a transmission down there. Now that's important to know the location of both of these things in your car, because when you start draining oil you want to make sure you drain it from the right component. So I've heard of people draining transmission oil and they're meant to be draining the oil pan of the engine. Both can look pretty similar, so it's best just to know what side the engine is on. Okay, so we know it's on our left. We'll have a look under the car and we'll just see what we're looking at down there. Now looking under the left hand side of the car here, we want to identify the oil filter, and we can see that over here. And located behind that is the sump plug at the bottom of the oil pan. Now we've located the oil sump plug and oil filter on the engine. The next step is just to run the engine, and we'll just get a bit of warmth into the engine. What that does is it lowers the oil's viscosity so that it flows easier and drains out of the engine easier. Now you don't want to warm the motor up too much that you burn yourself on the waste oil when you drain it, but you just want to get it up to a temperature. Normally I just wait till this rocker cover heats up enough, and if it starts getting too hot to put my hand on it, I know it's warmed up to the right temperature. So I can feel that's getting warm enough now. I'm just going to turn this motor off and start draining the oil. Okay, so now we're going to undo the sump plug, and then we'll take this filter off. Now you can see the sump plug's just located there. This is our filter, and we'll just pop this socket on there. Now that's a good fit, and we'll just get a socket arm on there and we'll just loosen that off. Now we've broken the seal on the sump plug, so I can undo this by hand now. So we'll just leave that there in the meantime. Next thing we're going to do is loosen up this oil filter, and I'm just going to see if I can undo this by hand. Okay, we've loosened up the oil filter and that's ready to come off as well. Before we completely remove the sump plug, we're just going to take this oil filler cap off. Now we're just going to place the oil drain tray under the sump plug, and then we're just going to remove the sump plug. And once the sump plug is removed, just let the oil drain out of the oil pan. Now while we wait for that oil to drain, I'm just going to remove this oil filter. Now just be careful when you're taking these off, because they're filled with oil, so you don't want to take it off and end up spilling it everywhere. Whoops, well that's got it off anyway. So we'll just get our new filter ready to fit to the engine. Now if we take a closer look at the filter, this is the rubber gasket here we want to just apply a thin layer of oil to. Now it doesn't really matter if you use the old oil from the engine or new oil from your new container. I prefer to use new oil, so I'm just going to wipe some oil around this gasket, and I'm also just going to wipe a little bit just in this thread here. So to do that, I just dip my finger into the new oil container and just get enough oil on the edge of your finger there. Now the reason why we apply a thin layer of oil onto this oil filter gasket here is when we screw this oil filter up, when the mating surface of the engine and the oil filter meet, we want to just get rid of that friction when we're screwing that oil filter up. Now another reason too is we don't want this rubber gasket to fuse to the mating surface, so just applying a little bit of oil here helps. And don't forget to just apply a little bit of oil to the inner thread there. Now I'm just going to wipe off this mating surface for the oil filter. Before we fit our new oil filter here, you just want to check the mating surface where the oil filter screws onto the engine here. And what you're checking for is you just want to check that the old gasket hasn't been left there. Now another way to check this is just looking at the back of the old filter. Now you can see that the old filter has its gasket still attached. Now what you don't want is the old gasket to still be attached to that mating surface there. So what will happen if you do have a old gasket there and you screw the new filter onto that, it's just not going to create a good seal. Okay, well, we'll just screw this in. Now I normally just do the oil filters up by hand, and I just do the oil filter up as much as I can until it basically stops. Okay, well I think that's far enough, and we'll move on to the sump plug. So this is our sump plug that will refit to the engine. Now that little washer there is a crush washer. So that washer looks to have a good lot of life left in it, so that's going to create a good seal when it's done up. Now if you do find that the sump plug area has got a little bit of a leak, it may just be that that crush washer needs replacing, or you can just buy a new sump plug. Okay, we'll just get back under here and we'll fit the sump plug. Now I've just screwed up that sump plug by hand, and we'll tighten it up with a socket in a minute. Just give this a little bit of a wipe, just get rid of this oil that's here. Now when you're tightening the sump plug up with a socket, you just basically want to nip that sump plug up. You don't want to over tighten it. Now the next step is just filling the motor with engine oil, so we'll just give this a bit of a wipe. I normally like to just check the inside of the funnels are clean. That way if you're pouring oil into them and there's dirt in there, you're not putting that into the engine. So I'll just give that a quick wipe. And before we start filling the motor with oil, just give our dipstick a wipe. If you're like me and you're unsure what oil quantity the engine takes, what I do is fill the engine with oil and monitor the oil level on the dipstick. So I'll start off putting 2 litres of oil into the engine, and then we'll check the dipstick. Now once you've filled that first bit of oil into the motor, just give it a while before you check the dipstick. Just give it enough time to drain into the engine. Okay, we'll just check this dipstick. Oh yep, don't know how well you can see that, but that's just over half full. Now what I normally do is top up the oil so it shows full on the dipstick, and then we can start and run the car. Okay, we'll just have another check here of the oil level. I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but the oil level indicator is just above the full line, so that's okay. The next thing we need to do is start the car. Now the reason why we do that is you may recall the new oil filter we fitted doesn't have oil in it, So the motor needs to pump engine oil through it. So what we'll do is we'll start the car, that'll get that oil filter filled up with oil. After running the car, let it sit for about 5 minutes to allow the oil to drain back into the oil pan. Take your oil level reading, top up the oil, and that's the job done. Well, that brings us to the end of another video. We've successfully changed the engine oil in this car. Hopefully you've learned a few tips along the way and can successfully change the oil in your own car. I think the main thing is just give yourself plenty of time and you'll be able to do a oil change too. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.